Support for this show comes from Lead Quizzes. Lead Quizzes helps you easily set up high-converting quizzes to capture and qualify leads for your business. Visit leadquizzes.com/podcast to get a 14-day free trial today.
At that point in time, two things really became clear. One is you never know the value of your network until you really need it. And the second thing is when you hit rock bottom in life, and we all hit rock bottom at some point in time, you're really left with two things. One is your word and the integrity of your word. And the second thing is your relationships. So never tarnish your word and always invest in relationships.
From Lead Quizzes, it's Journey to Seven Figures, a show about entrepreneurs and the stories behind how they grew their business to seven figures and beyond. We cover the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the lessons they learned along the way. I'm Jeremy Ellens, and this is episode number 3. On today's show, I interviewed Jayson Gaignard. Jayson built a $7 million a year ticketing business, resulting in an income that was 22 times the national average. Just to discover, it didn't make him happy. He decided to jump out of that business, and on the verge of bankruptcy, he took a loan from a friend to throw an event and hire Tim Ferriss. He's since turned that event into a business that generates $2.1 million a year and costs $10,000 to attend. So if you're struggling in your business or not as happy as you want to be, this is a great story about overcoming adversity and finding your happiness. Let's jump right in. All right, well, welcome. I'm very excited to introduce Jayson Gaignard today to the show. We're going to talk about his journey to seven figures. He's doing some really amazing things. He's had an interesting background, and now he's in the event space where he's selling tickets for $10,000 to $12,000. So we'll talk about his journey and how he's gotten to the point where he's been able to demand that much and how he's become a master networker. So welcome, Jayson. Excited to have you on.
Dude, not as excited as me. Not as excited as me.
Awesome. Well, Jayson, why don't you, a real quick, 1 to 2 sentences, what is Mastermind Talks?
So MMT is a invite-only event and community for entrepreneurs. We started in 2013, and since our inception, we've had just shy of 16,000 entrepreneurs apply for an event that's capped at 150 people annually. And we've had some great success with it, thankfully. And usually when you have success in this industry, the common strategy to scale is bigger events or more events. And that's something I didn't necessarily want to do. I've built 2 7-figure businesses. And the first one, I scaled for the sake of scaling, and it ultimately wasn't what I wanted. So instead of scaling in size every year, which is what everybody else does, I scale by raising the price. So as you know, the event price has gone up year over year for the last 6 years. So that's been our kind of scaling strategy. So MMT, it's a community of just fascinating entrepreneurs.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely there's got to be some cool people that you'd meet at an event like this if they're able to pay 10 to 12 grand. And last year you did 2.1 million in sales. So very cool, Jayson. Let's jump into the background, and we can start with kind of how you first got into business and being an entrepreneur if you want.
Yeah, sure. So really, I dropped out of high school. I started a service-based business. Realized that service-based businesses can be hard to scale, and not necessarily online service-based businesses, but physical. And I had a concierge company where we run errands for people. And our slogan was, if it was legal, moral, and would save you time, we'll take care of it. So I did everything from watering people's trees and driving their grandparents around to breaking up with people's girlfriends and just literally walking up to the door and dropping off their stuff. So
this was an early TaskRabbit or something, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were pre-TaskRabbit. We were old school back then. So we didn't have that technology layered on top. It was just me. I'd do anything for $60 an hour, basically. Yeah. So I was trying to build a small little business around that. And, one of the things, and I know the theme of this is about building a 7-figure business. Oddly enough, there was somebody who was in a local magazine, which is similar to Inc. magazine. And he was featured in it for helping entrepreneurs get government grants. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I'm young, I'm 18. I should be able to get some kind of grant. So I reached out and he said, he said politely, don't waste my time. My clientele basically, clientele are more tech companies and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right. Oddly enough, the following month, I was featured in that said magazine over a 3-page spread. And he ended up seeing it and calling me back. And it's like, hey, let's do dinner. So we ended up doing dinner. And the one thing was, at the time, I was probably doing about $5,000 a month, $5,000 to $7,000 a month. Mm-hmm. And he's like, first time we met, he's like, imagine a time when you're doing $80,000 a month. And intellectually, I'm like, yeah, I totally get it. Emotionally, I'm like, there's no way I'll ever do $80,000 a month. About 3.5 years later, I remember we did our first $900,000 month. And I remember saying, damn, 3 years ago, that's when it clicked because I completely forgot. I'm like, 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine doing $80,000 a month. And to me, it was just a really important lesson of surrounding yourself with people who think big, because up until that point, I was thinking small, didn't surround myself with anybody or have the opportunity to surround myself with anybody who thought on another level. So I ended up pivoting out of that service-based business into concert tickets. Because when people thought of the word concierge, they thought of hotel concierge. When they thought of hotel concierge, they thought of concert tickets. People started to come to us for concert tickets and slowly started growing our inventory. Ultimately, we became the second largest wholesaler in Canada and then started a retail division as well with retail stores and that kind of stuff. But it turned out the industry or the business wasn't for me. After 7 years of being an entrepreneur, I discovered I built a business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like. I was stuck on this hamster wheel. So I scaled that business to 7 figures. It was about $7 million a year. It was really good financially, but just was the wrong industry for me out of the gate.
Well, let's back that up. So how do you get, like your first couple hundred clients for this ticketing business?
So we were a wholesale company. Basically, it's almost similar to Amazon on some level, where basically I have friends who built these multi-million-dollar Amazon businesses, and they've done it with like 2 or 3 employees, and they don't have to worry about dealing with customers or sales or marketing. Amazon is that hub that drives everything for them, which is dangerous because when 95 or 100% of your revenue comes from one revenue stream, it's only a matter of time, before they start to squeeze you and your margins get thinner and thinner. And I knew that was going to be the case in that industry as well. So that's how we scaled so quickly, ultimately, was that we were in the ticketing business. There was one provider that managed 6,000 different websites. So we just sold inventory through them. So we grew to about $4 million a year with 3 employees. So it was just a really lean business. And we kept on doubling down and making risk that other people weren't willing to make. I always say ignorance and confidence can go a long way when you're an entrepreneur. And because of that, it took some chances that ended up paying off, but could have landed me in the poorhouse. But that's how we scaled really quickly. But again, when I realized we have one revenue stream that's pretty much 90% of our revenue, that's problematic. And eventually we're going to get squeezed. So I decided to start a retail division so that we can get both sides of the transaction. We can get the wholesale figure and we can also get the retail figure, and slowly started to build that out. Had a team of about 20 people and 2 retail stores. And then until I reached a point where I realized I wanted to get out of that industry. But yeah, a lot of learnings on the way up.
So the wholesale side, were you buying then like a ton of tickets in bulk and then just selling it on someone else's platform?
Exactly, yeah. So we buy hundreds of tickets for a show, and then we liquidate them on StubHub or eBay, or there's thousands of websites ultimately. There's a few of these monsters behind the scenes that populate inventory for all these thousands of websites, and we dealt with them directly. So that's how we scaled so quickly and so leanly, which again is very similar to what you're seeing with Amazon right now.
Okay, awesome. And then you started getting into the retail space. Like, what did that mean? You got physical stores where you would sell tickets?
One of the common beliefs of that industry is that common worries that tickets are fake. So to combat that, even though ticketing where we were in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario specifically, is still somewhat, it's a gray area. There's like anti-scalping laws from like the 1970s. So, we were always kind of worried, like, are they finally going to crack down or not? But so I came up with the ballsy move of opening retail stores, because I'm like, if somebody comes into our store, they're not going to question the validity of their tickets, even though oddly enough, some people still did. And I'm like, dude, your show's on Saturday. I'm in a 5-year lease. Worst case, you throw a brick through my window. Like, I'm not leaving. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to sell you fake tickets. So that was like our philosophy, was to start with a retail presence, do a lot of classified ads, Facebook ads. This is early stage Facebook, Google AdWords, landing pages, like stuff that would be like very basic internet marketing now was pretty high tech back then, I must say, especially integrating it into an industry where the average like ticket scalper is who you think it is, like some old dude missing some teeth, addicted to some kind of drug, most likely drug of choice, and selling tickets, and hustling in front of a venue. So we try to bring like professionalism to it, technology to it, and those kind of things.
So what were some of the keys to like your success? I'm sure it wasn't as easy as just buying a bunch of tickets and then putting them on the site. Or was that really was that it? You just were really good at buying and then like this site just sold everything for you?
Yeah, really good at buying. that was I made a lot of mistakes in that business. I mean, yes, we made a lot of money financially and we scaled, and by most people's standards on the outside, it was a really successful business. But I always say it was like the death of 1,000 paper cuts. I was very much the bottleneck of the business. Mm-hmm. And when I wanted to get out of the business, I couldn't sell the business. If I wanted to sell the business, I'd probably have to stay on board for another like 18 months. So we could kind of get me out of it, build actual structures and build a proper team and all that kind of stuff. So I was very much the bottleneck of the business. I had terrible hiring practices. I just would interview people. And I'm like, I like you. Let's work together. And I just come in on Monday, which is a terrible way to hire. I've since learned like the importance of like a system like Top Grading or reading a book like Who by Jeff Smart and Randy Street. A lot of friends of mine who've built very big businesses use that as a foundation. So that is a must read for entrepreneurs who are doing hiring. There was that. Again, it was an industry I didn't necessarily like, so that didn't help either.
The systems was a huge thing. So I'm guessing you're putting in like metrics as far as like what are people supposed to be doing and how do you track them, like as well as training.
Yeah, I mean, friends of mine who've really scaled their business beyond themselves. I mean, really, I was, again, the bottleneck that like I was still the business and had all these minions around that I could be like, hey, do this and you do that. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't leave. And
you were managing everything, like micromanaging people?
100%. I was working 7 days a week, and concerts, we had to deal with concerts in different time zones. So if a concert was Pacific time at 8 o'clock, that means I had to be on call till 11 o'clock at night in case they got denied at the door or something like that. So I was always kind of on call. But, what I learned, again, a lot of things the hard way, scaling that business or attempting to scale that business. And I definitely would have proper structures in place now, either that be implementing systems like Traction, which I know a lot of friends of mine just really resonate with that model. There's a lot of different other systems out there, but Traction, for the most part, in my peer group, who built 7, 8, 9-figure companies, they really enjoy that model. I mean, the whole philosophy of like an integrator and a visionary makes roles really clear as an entrepreneur. So they have one book called Rocket Fuel, which touches on that, which is a must read for any entrepreneur, I believe. And again, the whole Traction methodology. Another one that people may want to get exposed to is Scaling Up and Vern Harnish and his Rockefeller Habits. But if I were to only recommend one, it would be getting very familiar with Gino Wickman and Traction.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that book as well. Yeah, that one's awesome.
So yeah. I didn't have structures. That's the moral of this story. No structures, burned myself out, and couldn't take a day vacation. So
let's talk about that. When I posed like, what are some questions you'd ask entrepreneurs that hit 7 figures? Like one that was pretty popular was like, were you happy when you got there? So it sounds like you weren't. Like, what were the reasons why you weren't happy?
A couple things. I mean, one was I realized, one year I discovered I was making 22 times the national average income. And that was bothersome to me because I was not 22 times happier than the average male. I was not 22 times healthier. 3 years prior, at the age of 23, I had kidney complications because of stress. So I realized that money and happiness scale very differently. And my goal was to make as much money as possible. And there comes a point where you can buy whatever you want and it doesn't give you the the fulfillment that you're looking for. Coco Chanel has a great saying that the best things in life are free. The second best things are very, very expensive. And I've learned that to be true because after the demise of that business, I hit rock bottom and had nothing left and really started to understand the importance of, where do you really get fulfillment? What does make you happy and those kind of things? Doesn't mean you can't build a 7 or 8 figure business and be happy. That's definitely not true at all. I mean, I have friends who build incredible companies and it's how there's different approaches. I mean, I have friends and it all comes down to mindset and how you position things. Like, I hated my business. I hated my customers. I have other friends who are in industries who hate their industry, not a big fan of their customers, but they love their team. And the reason why they're scaling the business, they have 150 employees, that's a family to them. So they get value from that perspective. I have other people who hate their business, hate the industry, but the more money they can make, the more impact they can make. And that's where they get the fulfillment. So it's everybody's kind of different. I just realized that for me, every business has a sweet spot. And as you start to scale, you kind of realize this. And it hit me when I built my first business, when we were probably doing about $1.5 million in revenue, and I was netting maybe about $400K a year. And that was with 3 employees. Mm-hmm. And my ignorance was that, hey, if I'm doing 1.5 million revenue, I'm doing 400K net. If I double my revenue, I'll most likely double my profit. That wasn't the case at all. I doubled my revenue to 3 million the following year. I had twice the amount of getting headaches, and twice or three times the amount of team to manage that. And I only netted like $470,000. So money and profit scaled very differently. And I find that in my business currently is, we do $2 million a year. I have one employee. It's a very happy and relatively easy, profitable business. If I fell into the trap of just wanting to scale for the sake of scaling, yeah, I could do 2 events a year, or yeah, I could get to 8 figures, but for what? And what would that look like? So I'm just at a different kind of point in my life. Again, not anti-scale by any stretch. This business I have now is 7 figures. And again, I have friends who build these enormous businesses, but it really depends on what you're looking to get out of it and what that vehicle is. Because oftentimes what happens is entrepreneurs choose to build these businesses because they think it's going to be a vehicle for freedom to do what they want, when they want, wherever they want, and those kind of things. But then they become trapped by their business, and they become a slave to their business. And they have the freedom to do things. They have the financial freedom to go on vacation. They have the financial freedom to buy a boat, but they don't have the freedom from the business to actually do that stuff.
That's a great point. I think there's definitely some of those like layers in your business, or like benchmarks that you hit where like you talked about, you have to bring in management, and then there's added expenses where they're not necessarily increasing productivity of your labor. So stuff like this, where like you start to, like you said, your profits are decreased even compared to your revenue.
All it is just really having a discussion is like, is this something you want to do? Because people, again, scale and don't question it. But when you hit that sweet spot, just question, do you want to take it to that next level? And if you do, understand there's going to be a dip. And once you survive that dip, then you're going to make it to that next level, and there'll be another sweet spot. But the mistake, I see people make is they're oblivious to, they think things are good now, they'll be good when I have a management team, or I'm trying to hire people or scale, those kind of things. Buckle down for a tough year. And it may be great. Again, 18 months from now, you may be making more money, you may be more free from the business, but understand it's going to take some work.
Yeah, that's good. Having that awareness and intention around like, do you actually want to scale to 7 figures or beyond? I think it's a really good point. So back to the story, you scale this business up to $7 million. Your health starts to suffer. You're not as happy as you want to be. So what happens after that? What's that challenge like where it crashes or it comes down?
Yeah. So again, I couldn't sell the business. I couldn't get out of it unless I stayed in it. And I just couldn't do that to myself. So I decided to scale the business down to 0, because my thought was that I'll have a little bit of money left in the bank and I'll have runway to start something new. Again, because I didn't have proper structures in place, because I had B players who had C players underneath them, the culture was so bad in the business, I didn't even want to go into the office. That basically, while we were scaling down, on top of that, we had 2 things that happened that were beyond our control that landed me $250,000 in debt in August of 2012. And one of the lessons I can extrapolate from that experience that will be helpful to your audience, I normally kind of glance over this, but it's important in the notion of scale, is banks will give you money when you don't need it. So, when things are good, like the markets are good right now, it's easy to get a bank loan, it's easy to get a line of credit. Although it's almost, it's hard to get around to applying for that loan. You're like, I'm just going to focus on business and just the busyness of business. Yeah, when times are good, make sure you extend that credit if at all possible. That was one of the things that put us in a spiral. Bought all of our inventory through one credit card company, and we did about $500,000 a month on this one credit card. And after 5 years, never having a problem whatsoever, they had this new account manager who decided to put the card on hold, basically eliminating our ability to purchase new inventory. So that was a lesson I learned the hard way. So yeah, basically when the dust settled, I was $250,000 in debt, didn't know what I was going to do next. That was definitely my rock bottom. There's a saying that when one door closes, another one opens, but it sucks to be stuck in the hallway. That was a very dark hallway for me at the time. I had no clue what the hell I was going to do next.
That's tough. And you have family at this point too?
Yeah. So everything, and that's what added to it, is that the house of cards fell in August. September 1st, I got married to my wife. And September 1st, my daughter turned 6 months old. So there was a lot of things going on in transition at the time. And yeah, I had my wife, and she was super helpful during that phase, but it was definitely a tough time.
So how did you manage that? Did you feel like you had a good support team to be able to help you through it?
Outside of my wife, I had a few peers, but they thought I was crazy for scaling that business down. They're like, dude, sell it, just stay in it, buckle in and sell it. And one of the things when I realized, when I have awareness around something or I see a truth, I can't shy away from it. If I realize I'm unhappy doing something, I got to change tomorrow. I can't wait 9 months or 18 months. So, but yeah, I had no peer group at the time. I mean, that's the one thing about me is like Forbes called me like one of the top networkers to watch a few years ago and all this kind of stuff. When I got married in 2012, I had a bachelor party. I had 2 people show up to my bachelor party, my brother and my brother-in-law. Nobody. So yeah, I had to build everything on some level from scratch, including, my relationships. So yeah, so that's what I set out to do. And how things started to turn around on some level was somebody had a ticket to go see Seth Godin in New York. And I've always been a big fan of Seth's work, but never had an opportunity to see him in person in a live kind of seminar setting. So I decided to go and didn't know what it was about. Turns out the theme of it was the connection economy and how there's huge value connecting like-minded individuals. And I just felt very isolated as an entrepreneur at the time. So I decided to come back home and start something I called Mastermind dinners, where I'd invite 8 entrepreneurs out for dinner with the core focus of connecting them. And the first one I did, I almost canceled 2 hours prior because I'm like, nobody's going to see value in this. They're going to think I completely wasted their time. But thankfully, it turned out to be a big success. And I realized that connecting people was something I wanted to do, not necessarily as a business, because I wasn't monetizing these dinners. I was actually paying for them out of pocket. So even though I didn't know I was going to make rent the following month, for me, the way I kind of rationalized it was that the bank could take my car, they could take whatever measly assets I left, but they couldn't take my relationships. Investing in my relationships to me was the safest investment I can make. So I continued on with those dinners, then had an opportunity to do an event with a friend of mine named Tim Ferriss, who's written 5, I guess, New York Times bestseller.
I want to jump back before Tim Ferriss. So you said like these dinners were a big success. Like how did you see them as being successful?
Great question. So they weren't successful financially, again, because I was paying for them out of pocket. They were successful in the sense of like how people came in and how they left. Like they really saw the value in it. They really enjoyed it. Selfishly, I enjoyed it immensely. I got fulfilled from the experience. I love being around other entrepreneurs who are just doing great things. There's an energy to that I love being around. And I have friends who've scaled enormous businesses. And I'm like, I love being in a position where I just can be close friends and live vicariously through them, through like scaling to like 8 figures or 9 figures or those kind of things. But I don't have to, it doesn't keep me up at night. So, like I have this nice little simple business now and I have all these friends that are growing these massive companies. So yeah, that's kind of how I was measuring success. And again, also coming off something that I wasn't happy to do, to be able to do something that did fulfill me and did light me up, it was a nice feeling.
I think that's awesome, Jason. I know you've done these for years. I attended one of yours when you were out in Scottsdale one time. And so I started doing some of these myself. You actually wrote a book on your process, how to do this, which you can share. But I found the same thing. I found like people were very, very appreciative of you just being the one curating and connecting people. And it's interesting. It puts you in a different light as well. Like I remember I brought someone in, a friend named Alona, who we'll have on this show. And yeah, like that was like the first time I think I had hung out with her. And then like after that, she had this thought around like, oh, you have such a great network. You're so well connected. And whether that was true or not at the time, it's interesting. You get put in this different light around being that connector, that go-to person, just because you're arranging these kind of things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I still see value, and I'm doing one for 100 entrepreneurs. I bought out a restaurant next week in Toronto, and I'm doing a big one for 100 entrepreneurs. So I continue to do these all the time, even though my cup is full. Like I already have pretty much almost all the relationships I could ever ask for. There's just so much value for other people and that kind of stuff that to me, it's a no-brainer. I mean,
they're fun.
No, yeah. I mean, I can spend $5,000 on Facebook ads and blink and nothing happened. With $5,000, I can host a dinner for 60 entrepreneurs or 70 entrepreneurs. And the ROI from that is bananas. And that shows that the thing is that people don't invest in relationships because they can't peg an ROI to it. But having invested in relationships pretty heavily since 2011, I can easily look back and connect the dots. And God, I would not be where I am without a shadow of a doubt without relationships.
And I think anybody like listening to this too, like Jason, like he pays for all of the dinners, but I've done it myself where I paid for them and I've had them where just people split. Yeah. And I would say my personal experience, like I feel like people are just as appreciative at either. So if you don't have the money, don't feel like you have to be the one that buys the whole dinner.
That's a really, really great point because yeah, I mean, I do. Every dinner I haven't paid for, it's still in the back of my head. Like it bothers me, but that's just like my own like belief system. I have a lot of people who do dinners. People pay a premium and they probably get almost just as much recognition and value from it just for being that catalyst to connect everybody. So that's a really great opportunity.
Yeah, because you did the work of connecting people. Awesome. So we'll jump forward. I read the book. It was a great book. What was it called? Mastermind Dinners?
Yep.
Okay, so you can look that up if you want. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll get back to the show in a minute, but first a quick thanks to our sponsor, Lead Quizzes. If you want to grow your business to 7 figures and beyond, you must learn how to generate leads predictably. When I first started my business, lead generation felt like riding a roller coaster. I would have huge sales months and then months with nothing. This happened because I relied solely on referrals and networking to grow my business. Predicting growth and investing in the future were frightening because I didn't have control over my lead generation. That was before we created Lead Quizzes. Now I predictably generate leads in my sleep and have stopped worrying about where the next sale will come from. Top marketers like Neil Patel and Lewis House have used Lead Quizzes to increase their lead capture by up to 500%. Think about it. Quizzes are fun, engaging, and you can offer personalized feedback in exchange for your quiz taker's contact information. Lead Quizzes is a software that allows you to set up high-converting quizzes quickly without having to hire an expensive programmer. In fact, our users have generated over 3 million leads for their businesses. Take control of your lead generation today and start your 14-day free trial by going to leadquizzes.com/podcast. All right, so you have this first event with Tim Ferriss. So how does this happen? How does this occur?
How it happened was I woke up early one morning. I was waking up early on a lot of those mornings, and Tim Ferriss made a blog post called the All You Can Eat Campaign of Goodness. And what it was his book, The 4-Hour Chef, was banned from all retail distribution. So Walmart, Barnes & Noble, everybody. And the reason for that is that Barnes & Noble specifically wanted to make an example out of Tim because he was the first big name author to publish through Amazon. And Amazon was just becoming too big of a player in the publishing space. So they banned him, and him being a 2-time New York Times bestselling author at the time, there's a lot of pressure that the next book is going to be a big hit as well. So what he did was he created these book bundles where if you bought 5 books, he'd send you additional resources. If you bought 25 books, maybe he'd do a webinar with you. He had this Hail Mary package that if you bought 4,000 books, he'd do 2 speaking engagements. And at the time, I thought of a friend of mine who does big events, and I'm like, dude, you can take advantage of this. He doesn't speak that often. He's never spoken in Canada. So I sent him an email. The minute I click send, I say, you know what, this is a great opportunity for anybody. So I ended up reaching out to Tim directly because I met him a year prior, so we somewhat knew each other. And I said, you know what, I'll take the package. The problem was, again, I was $250,000 in debt, didn't know how I was going to make rent, and I had to come up with the money in 48 hours because the books need to be purchased that week. And I ended up calling 3 friends. The first one said, sounds interesting. Like, can you send me some numbers? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Let me loop back with you. But I'm like, dude, this is an industry I don't know. I'm not even like a number-driven entrepreneur. I don't think in that way. So I'm like, I'll loop back with you. We'll see. The second person said, sounds awesome. Let's start a business together. And I'm like, dude, that sounds amazing. I have one more person to call. Third person I called said, come to my office tomorrow morning, pick up a check. Didn't ask much about the business idea. Didn't talk about repayment terms, any of that kind of stuff. I just hung up the phone. I didn't want to keep him on the phone any longer so that he changed his mind. I went to his office first thing the following morning and picked up the check, deposited it, sent the wire to Tim. And Mastermind Talks turned out to be a big success. And a few months after the event, I reached back out to that friend because, again, we never talked about repayment terms. And I said, why'd you give me that money? Because on paper, that's the worst investment you could make. Like, I'm a 27-year-old entrepreneur with a wife and a child, $250,000 in debt. This is an industry that had no experience in, and a business idea that was only a few hours old. And he said, ultimately, I wasn't investing in the business. I was investing in you. And at that point in time, 2 things really became clear. One is you never know the value of your network until you really need it. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is when you hit rock bottom in life, and we all hit rock bottom at some point in time, you're really left with 2 things. One is your word and the integrity of your word. And the second thing is your relationships. So never tarnish your word and always invest in relationships. And Tim ended up being the catalyst for the event, and we built a whole kind of speaker lineup around him and built an event around that. And that's how we did MMT. And Mastermind Talks for me was not supposed to be an event. It was designed really to keep me busy for a couple months because I was spiraling out of control and because I had nothing to do. And I'm like, well, at least this will keep me focused for the next 5 months, and I'll figure out what my next business will be. And if I can break even at this, great. But in the worst case, I'll put 100 great entrepreneurs in the room, and that'll add 100 great entrepreneurs to my network. And when I would say ignorance and confidence can go a long way, the event, I didn't know how to do an event. And because of that, it was much more similar to a wedding than it was a conference. And that turned out to be the reason it was successful. And at the end of the first event, I sat with it for a couple of days and I said, you know what, let's do a second one to prove that the first one wasn't a fluke because it went really well. And we did a second one, and then we did our 5th one in Carmel, and we're doing our 6th one this year in Park City. So that's
Very
how I got in
cool.
the events business.
Yeah. So the first one, to unpack that, what you did is you got Tim Ferriss. So you got someone like very well known, and that you leverage that name to get more speakers.
Yep.
And then you leverage those speakers to be able to get attendees lined up.
Yep. 100%. I mean, it's a kind of like there's a philosophy in real estate called anchor tenants, which is if you have a flailing mall or plaza, if you get an Apple store, it may bring a Nordstrom or you may bring somebody else. So sometimes you'll make concessions for that first kind of big name. So it's like influencer marketing ultimately on some level. So I had Tim, and then I knew I could get people who were already connected with Tim, but are never at the same place at the same time. So I can make the event a catalyst to reconnect all his friends. Or I could get speakers who wanted to be connected to Tim to speak, and they all spoke for free because I had no money. So that's how we built it ultimately.
Okay, so very cool. So like you leverage this relationship with Tim through this book buy. You got these other people who are interested in being around him or seen with him or just want to be on that stage. How did you start getting some of the attendees? Did you run like Facebook ads or just reach out to your network? Yeah,
so again, I had no network at the time. It's funny, I actually posted the scariest Facebook post I've ever made was when I announced that I was going to do this event because, the friends I did have at the time didn't know what my next business would be and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, if I put this out to the world and nobody buys tickets and I have to cancel it, it looks not a good look. And I remember finding that Facebook post recently. It was like February 9th, 2013. I posted it. I had like 12 likes and like 6 comments. Nobody. So really how I built it was two things. One is I did Facebook Facebook retargeting.
Okay.
Because back then in 2013, nobody knew what that was. All they knew is they go on a website and next thing you know, that website's following them around all over the internet. So that was really like new territory back then. And then I did an influencer campaign where
what's the retargeting? How did you get people on your website, first of all?
So this influencer campaign where basically I had 50 people who were either speaking at the event, were influencers that were going to be at the event or wanted to be at the event but couldn't be there. Basically within a 48-hour period, tweet out or make a Facebook post or send an email to their email list about the event. It wasn't an affiliate thing or anything like that. It was just an awareness campaign. Mm-hmm. And out of that campaign, I think we had 6,000 hits to a landing page, and 738 people applied from it. Ultimately, we had 4,200 entrepreneurs apply for the event. But 738 just came through that one campaign. Plus, on top of that, we had retargeting once they landed there. So that was the biggest thing that we did, and that worked really well for us.
So you got these influencers to send it out, and then you did like an application model into it, so they applied to come to the event. Yeah.
So how it worked is people would apply, and I was not expecting this many people to apply. Like it wasn't scalable. I would have thought of better questions and a better. Because I literally had to go through like all the applications one by one.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Some people throw up a WordPress website and consider themselves an entrepreneur, so you have to like vet through that. But so I had an application process. If I thought they were a right fit, I'd send them an invitation. And if they secured that invitation, I'd hold a phone call with them. And on that phone call, I'd assess if they were the right fit for the event or not. And if they weren't the right fit, I'd refund their money. And that first event, we refunded $42,000 in paid tickets, which was the mentors I did have at the time were like, you're nuts because why are you turning away money, especially if you're $250,000 in debt? But it turned out to be what made the experience unique overall was that level of curation and the fact that I was willing to refund people who were not a right fit and all that kind of stuff. Those who did make it felt incredibly special, as they should. And it really built just a really great community. And that's what the event's been. It's more from we want to be almost like the TED Talks for entrepreneurs to just like a family gathering of sorts where, we used to do 14 talks in 2 days. Now we'll do 3 talks over 3 days max. It's evolved into something very, very different.
Very cool. So did I hear you say you would charge like a down payment on the invitation, like before the phone call or?
Yeah. So I would charge them full pop because the thing is I didn't want to waste my time doing phone calls with people and then trying to sell them.
How much was it?
So this is a fun little lesson on A/B testing. I asked friends of mine at the time, I said, how much could I get for an event like this? And they're like, I had friends in the event space who do big events. And they're like, probably at most like $1,000. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right. So I charged $995. And then we were getting all these applications coming in. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll try raising the price and I'll just send 100 people to a different landing page. So I threw up a price of $33.97. Mm-hmm. We had just as many people sign up at $33.97 than we did at $995. But they were better quality people, which to me was the biggest was the biggest deal because I hated dealing with 995 clients and then having to turn them away and have all these crappy phone calls and that kind of stuff. So that's actually the reason we've become this high price point event, was that simple A/B test, because we could have easily been like everybody else, but we've been able to kind of move upriver or upstream, so to speak, because of that simple A/B test many years ago.
Very cool. Well, I think that's a great strategy. So even if like someone listening to this isn't in the event space, like finding some kind of interesting thing where an influencer is going to want to mail for you, whether that's you do an interview with them or they do a guest blog or just other things to make them look great and make it very easy for them to share. Could be like, getting them to come speak at your event. I think that's a really great strategy just to put in that hustle and get in front of other people pretty cheaply.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I try to just get those people emotionally invested in the event. So if they were coming to speak, they were already emotionally invested.
Yeah, it's really smart.
Let's get this out. And I was also very kind of vulnerable and not vulnerable, but transparent with them as well. That like, this was my first event. I'm trying real hard, blah, 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 like all this kind of stuff without being like, woe is me. But they saw that I was trying to make this work the best I could. And because of that, they supported me, and I'm forever grateful for it.
Awesome. So you had this one that was really successful. Lots of my friends, they all say like, this is the one event that I'll book for like multiple years. Like, so you have this great reputation around it. What were some of the biggest like lessons that you learned, like building Mastermind Talks? Or maybe what were some of the biggest like breakthroughs that you had?
Yeah, well, one is the importance of community. We always say that people may come to our events for content, but what gets them coming back year over year is community. And I remember on day two of our first event, we're wrapping up the event. I was doing a Q&A with this guy who has this 9-figure business, uber successful, and only half the people were in the room. The other half were in the other side of the conference room, which was, just like ran parallel to the room that we were at. And they were talking so loud that I couldn't even hear the guy I was doing the Q&A with on the stage. And I've had a bunch of cues like that. Like the one thing, I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at identifying small wins and then leveraging them. And being totally open, not being stuck on like, what's my vision for 3 years, not taking a shot at Cameron Herald. It's a great system. It's hard to plan. Like it's hard to come up with a 5-year vision when you're starting out a business, right? Yeah. You got to like test and throw things out there and see what works.
Shotgun.
Yeah. Now I can do like a 3-year vision and it'd be crystal clear. But back then I couldn't do it. And the one thing I've been good at is, again, identifying those little things, paying close attention to feedback, and then being willing to evolve and leverage and double down on things. Paying close attention to feedback to me has been crucial. I mean, the only reason we've evolved the way we have and have gotten better, and that's rare in events. Like our event 2 years ago, our approval rating was 9.73 out of 10. Our last event was 9.90. Sorry, 9.90 out of 10. Makes me terrified for next year, but every year our events have gone significantly better, and it's based purely on feedback and taking that feedback to heart and creating a culture of feedback where not only you just send a survey and you're like, hey, I'd love to know your feedback, but we give them context as to why their feedback's important, what feedback we've used in the past and how that's shown up in our events. Once they leave feedback, we close that feedback loop and say, hey, like we only have 150 clients, so we can do this on a one-on-one basis, but you can still do it at scale on some level, saying like, hey, here's some of the pieces of feedback we got. Here's how we're going to apply it. So people know that their feedback is valued. It's not just sent into some survey monkey thing where nobody's going to look at it. And that's the only reason we've been as successful as we've been, is paying very, very close attention to feedback.
Okay. So feedback has been really important. Another thing I've seen from the outside is even just on like Facebook, you're like, discussing like how thoroughly you're either vetting people out or how thoroughly you're vetting out like even the event spaces and that kind of thing. Do you maybe want to talk about your mindset or your strategy around just like preparation behind events like this and like how that impacts like the experience or like the success?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're touching on, one thing I learned the importance of is transparency in showing your work specifically. We actually had a speaker at Mastermind Talks Year 1 named Michael Norton, who's a professor of marketing at Harvard. And I'm so mad at him for not writing a book on this topic because I think it's brilliant. And basically, the philosophy is that he hired a locksmith to come unlock his door. And the guy unlocked the door in like 8 seconds. And then the locksmith's like, that's going to be $150. The guy's like, dude, it took me like 8 seconds to unlock the door. And the locksmith laughed. And he's like, it's funny because 20 years ago when I was young and I'd like damage the door and I'd be sweating for 45 minutes, when I finally opened it and asked for the $150, people would tip me. And now that I'm so good at it, they don't value it as much. And so his philosophy was basically show your work. So we do a lot of like showing behind the scenes of how we put on the events, the way we do things, again, showing how we take feedback and all that kind of stuff, because it gives people more of a buy-in and helps build up anticipation and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of planning that goes into MMT. I mean, that's the only reason we do one event a year.
Mm-hmm.
We have the demand to do an event every 3 months if we wanted to, if we wanted to scale to 8 figures and all that kind of stuff. But it's easy to get on top. It's hard as hell to stay on top. And that terrifies me. It absolutely terrifies me. So that's why our next event is September, and we're really starting. The event's already half sold out with our renewals. We only allow half the people to come back every year. So that's sold out. We're going to open the new spots next month. So we'll be sold out 7 months in advance. And we'll start planning, 8-9 months in advance for this one kind of 3-day experience, which is kind of unheard of in our industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That story brought up for like the transparency around your work. I remember when we work with Joe Polish and he would help these people like Ariana Huffington with book campaigns. I remember one of the strategies that he did was he would make sure he would be CCing like these people on like all these emails showing like the amount of work that's going into these campaigns, which is really smart. So I think that kind of like, parallels with what you just shared. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And Michael Norton has great examples of like how Orbitz and Kayak and that kind of stuff, they can give you your search results right away, but they delay it. And that delay it makes you feel like the website is doing hard work on your behalf. And you're much more likely to actually convert and follow through with that booking because you feel like, again, the website tried its best to find the best booking. And Kayak has a higher conversion rate because you can physically see like, oh, it's $600 for your flight. Oh no, we found a $400 one. Or we have $3. So we use it a lot. It's a really kind of important thing for us. There's 2 things that shaped our business. One is that, and the other one is Joey Coleman's first 100 days, which is basically if you have the first 100 days of your customer's life cycle down packed, you'll have a customer for life. And we're very blessed now that John Paul DeJoria has a saying that I don't want to be in the order business, I want to be in the reorder business. So my focus is to hit it out of the park every time with the experience, or, if you're in the product business, like offer an incredible product and it will do the marketing for you. And people will keep coming back and coming back. I remember a friend of mine, Ryan Holiday, was the director of marketing at American Apparel when he was 23. And he's like, people come to me for like marketing advice, but he's like, I'm not a magician. He's like, if you have a crappy product, marketing, one thing that marketing will do is let people know that your product is crappy sooner than they would otherwise.
Yeah.
The importance of focusing on, in my space, the experience, or in other spaces, the product or the service.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, Jayson. Well, as we start to get wrapped up, a couple more questions. Like, what are you excited about next?
Both excited and nervous about our next Mastermind Talks event. Again, every year it gets scarier and scarier to raise that bar. So that terrifies me. I'm probably I am definitely doing another book on business relationships, like my absolute everything I know about business relationships. Mastermind Dinners was a small kind of portion of it, but everything I know in the context of business relationships, and that'll be coming out later this year. And currently working really, really hard on season 2 of the Community Made podcast, where the podcast comes out in seasons. Season 1 was all about scale. So actually a lot of what we talked about today, my viewpoints on scale. Then I brought like Gary Vaynerchuk on, who's going from like 600 employees to 1,000 employees by the end of the year. So his philosophy is he'll hire anybody with a heartbeat. So very different philosophy on scale. So that season 1's on scale. Season 2 is all about business relationships and networking at events and how to manage and nurture and amplify relationships. So yeah, that's what I have on my horizon.
Very cool. And then Jayson, like if you could go back in time and start over, what would you tell yourself?
I'd invest in Yazamo. Or lead quizzes. If I could go back in time. I don't know. One of the things is that Gandhi has a saying that there's more to life than increasing its speed. And I think it's just important sometimes, and it's tough to do as entrepreneurs, like building that strong foundation of your business. And again, getting access to credit and reading books like Who, so you can understand how to hire properly. Like hiring properly takes a long time, but it saves you a hell of a lot of time in the future and saves you a hell of a lot of money. We're building proper structures by using something like Traction. Again, we want to just keep growing and not think twice and keep moving forward, oftentimes when we're kind of spinning our wheels. So yeah, there's more to life than increasing its speed. And that quote to me has meant a lot of different things. But in the context of scale, it's just, sometimes just slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So I learned that from car racing, and it applies to business as well.
No, that's a great point. I'm mentoring someone through EO Accelerator right now, and that was one of the first things we focused on. Is like, I love sales and scaling, but we can't do that if we got to fix your profitability first, and then we got to fix employee turnover. And so getting those things in place is super important.
100%.
All right, Jayson. So if people want to learn more about you, where should they go?
Yeah, so all the usual social platforms: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, at Jayson Gaignard, JaysonGaignard, or for more details about the podcast, communitymade.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your great experiences with everyone.
I appreciate it, brother.
Thanks again for listening to our show this week. If you want to find out more about Jayson Gaignard and the lessons he shared today, or read our show notes, visit leadquizzes.com/3. If you'd like to start generating more leads for your business and get a 14-day free trial to Lead Quizzes, go to leadquizzes.com/podcast. Please also subscribe to our show on Apple or however you get your podcasts. I'm Jeremy Ellens, and you've been listening to Journey to 7 Figures.